right, when people contact me for Rachel's Vineyard, I don't just automatically think that everybody that contacts me isn't in a stage of denial, that there might still be some denial there. So I listen very carefully to what they're telling me. And when they start using language such as I had a procedure, even termination, or, you know, I was told to get rid of it, I know that there are levels and depths of denial that is still there. Sometimes it's fragments, sometimes it's really deep. You know, when I think of especially the women that contact me, and I say women, it's not just one, that, you know, I had multiple abortions, but I only want to come to Rachel's Vineyard for one of them. It's back to that, you know, stage. What Lily's going through is, if it's wanted, I'll grieve. And if it's not, well, it doesn't matter.
Hello, Rachel. Thank you for coming again.
Great to be here, Isabel.
I thought what would be good today would be to talk a little bit about abortion denial. And one of the reasons for this is I know a lot of people, and I know we've spoken about this, have either watched or listened to Lily Allen not long ago sharing her story of abortions, but sadly she was sharing it in a way that really showed what a state of denial she was in. You know, she was making these jokes about having 4 or 5 abortions, made a song about it that she couldn't even remember how many she'd had. And it was sort of taken up by the hostess who was talking to her, also making a joke and being very flippant about her own abortions. So I thought this would be a good time to talk about abortion denial. And maybe just to start with, can you share your thoughts on that and maybe what you think was going on there on a deeper level with that abortion denial that we saw and heard being played out?
Yeah, it really shocked me. I always think I'm not going to be shocked anymore, but I was really shocked and deeply saddened for Lily. When I think about abortion denial, I know we can be, you know, but there's denial in lots of different areas, but when we're talking about denial as a stage of grief, I'm very much now talking about where there has been a death, where someone died and not something. And Lily Allen very much is in the mindset of something and not someone died. The way they laughed together, I thought it was very nervous laughter. And I just think there was such a deep level of denial. I mean, poor Lily, you know, has suffered a stillborn at 6 months, and she actually, you know, is quoted for saying that, you know, I held my child, that, you know, it was a really horrific and awful experience, and one of the hardest things I've had to do as a person to deal with this. And I think, well, if that child, there's such grief, why isn't the grief for all these abortions, you know? Yeah. And I think it brings up the point of, depends if the child was wanted. So denial all the way through.
Yeah, and I think when you're saying there about it being a stage of grief, which is often the case for an abortion, that people don't even realise they're grieving. Yeah. And it can also be, I think, you know, looking at it not just from a psychological perspective, but also looking at it maybe from a more spiritual perspective, it can also be like a kind of state of the soul, can't it? I mean, I think we see this, and I'm sure we've all kind of experienced it in our own lives when we've sinned, and sometimes that initial reaction is to deny it, particularly when it's something a bit more serious and a bit harder to own up to. We almost either deny that there was anything wrong there, or we make excuses for ourselves. We try and lighten the situation. And to be fair, we can even see it in just very tiny little things. You know, if we've just lost our temper or we gossiped or whatever, we'll be making an excuse as to why that's okay in that situation. And sin can harden our hearts if we don't repent. And so it causes a spiritual blindness. And I think we often see that played out in abortion when people haven't, you know, had any forgiveness, they haven't repented in any way and haven't recognised that they've kind of fractured their relationship with God, especially if they don't even recognise that there is a God, then we can see that hardness of heart setting in. And I think that's another kind of aspect of the abortion denial, which, as you're just kind of touching on there, is often different from when somebody has an abortion. Often when someone has a miscarriage, often when they have a miscarriage, you will see that they recognise that they lost someone. Rather than something, as you were just saying.
When we're all very, I'm sure, familiar with Abby Johnson and the Film Unplanned and the interviews that Abby did, and she says that, how could you, she's often asked, how could you work in the abortion industry, actually be working in the product of conception room? Sometimes she'd laugh and joke, like Lily, and call it pieces of children. And how could you do that and not see what was in front of you was a human being, with legs and arms that you were lifting up. And she said, when you're that entrenched in sin, there is a blindness that takes place, and that's exactly what you're saying there.
Yeah. So how common is that then? And is it something that would happen immediately, people go into denial, or is it something decades later, from your experience?
I think from my experience of Rachel's Vineyard, people come in a delayed fashion after decades, will contact me and really begin to look at, that actually I'm grieving. The amount of times I have to say to somebody that contacts me in their 40s, 50s, 60s, up until their 80s, you're grieving, and that look of, oh yeah, that's what's going on for me. Now, we do as well have people that will contact me immediately and recognise the gravity, and the pain is so bad that very often they will ring me a few weeks later and go, I'm actually okay about my abortion experience. And it's just that it was so painful they can't quite go there. And, and I always say to them, contact me if ever you feel, that you need me again, contact me. And they often do, but it can be delayed.
And I think maybe it's a good time then to just look at some of the kind of signs or symptoms of that denial. How does that manifest in different ways, and how does it play out? And one of the things that's just coming to my mind as I'm talking to you is, I know very recently I've just seen that, in fact, it's more than one case with the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. There seems to be a few people who are actually making plays and actually comedies about their abortions, which just, again, sounds horrific, but you can see that it's because of the denial that they're in, that they're actually denying the gravity or just denying the reality of what went on with their abortion, that they're actually making a joke about it. And I think that's that kind of sort of slightly, well, not just slightly, but very kind of sick black humour that people use is often a way of kind of like denial is being played out, and they're confirming that in themselves.
Exactly. And when you think about, the comedian, and also Lily again, that having a joke about it, when you looked at the comments of what Liliana had said, and also the comments from the Fringe Festival, a lot of pro-aborts were actually really against this, and they said, this is disgusting, this is awful. But hold on a minute, you're also in denial. Why is it awful and disgusting? I thought it was just a procedure, like having, a tooth out. So why they're in denial as well? And very much on, right, when people contact me for Rachel's Vineyard, I don't just automatically think that everybody that contacts me isn't in a stage of denial, that there might still be some denial there. So I listen very carefully to what they're telling me. And when they start using language such as I had a procedure, even termination, or, I was told to get rid of it, I know that there are levels and depths of denial that is still there. Sometimes it's fragments, sometimes it's really deep. You know, when I think of especially the women that contact me, and I say women, it's not just one, that, I had multiple abortions, but I only want to come to Rachel's Vineyard for one of them. It's back to that, stage. What Lily's going through is, if it's wanted, I'll grieve, and if it's not, well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I recently saw a social media post put out by MSI, the abortion provider, and it was actually sort of showcasing one of their workers who was actually saying that she'd had 2 abortions when she was younger, and she wanted to make sure the experience was better for other women. And you can see how, by her working in the abortion industry, she's trying to sort of confirm in herself that it was okay. She's again, confirming herself in that state of denial by helping other women to do something and telling them it's okay, this is normal. this is fine, and making herself feel that it's okay and justified in what she went through.
I know my mum used to say years ago, you know, birds of a feather stick together, and you really do. You know, if you're in a stage of sin of any kind, you seem to hang around with people who will maybe make light of that sin or joke around with you. You know, if you're an alcoholic, very often you'll go and meet other alcoholics. It's the same sort of thing here.
Yeah, I remember actually a woman I used to know who was an ex-midwife, and she'd never had an abortion herself, but she supported abortion. And I remember having this discussion with her one day because, you know, she was taking objection to my pro-life stance. And I said to her, surely you must have seen, like, because I mean, we're actually talking about late-term abortion, which she justified right up until birth. She thought abortion was okay. And I said, well, surely you must have seen some of these babies being born early, you know, preterm babies. And she was like, of course I have. And I said, so what do you think abortion does to those babies, you know, if they're aborted? And she said, oh, Isabel, it's not what you think. It just gently puts them to sleep. And again, you see that huge denial. Somebody who's been a midwife all her life and isn't able to say the difference between sleep and death, which are vastly different things. But you can see that denial that she's living in, and that is coming out in the language that she's using. And it can sometimes be a coping mechanism, can't it, really, I think? Do you think that's true?
Definitely. I think in some aspects it's needed to begin with, whether it's a death of a family member or a death of your child through abortion. It can be quite protective, first of all, to help you just very gently work through, but you're not meant to stay in the stage of denial. We're meant to move through the stages of grief. I always say grief demands to be heard. And when you end up in that stage for years, decades, it becomes very, very dangerous. You know, another mantra here, very often from women that have been stuck in grief for far too long, is, I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. And I always, you know, at Rachel's Vineyard, it's a safe place to look at what we've done, and I always bring it back to me and I go, yeah, I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice I wanted to look at. I didn't have a choice that I was ready to even think about. There was a choice, I just didn't want that choice. And it allows other people to go, oh gosh, that's me too. And to come out of that mantra, to denial again.
That's a lovely kind of gentle way of stepping them through it, I think, actually. Because I know when I've met women or men who are in a state of denial, sometimes you're aware that it can actually be almost intentional at some points. You know, when they have a glimpse of what reality is, and then you can almost see them stepping back from it again, like, this is too big for me to accept at the moment, you know. It's like the truth becomes apparent to them, and then they think about whether they're willing to go there, and then they think of all the ramifications of that and what that really means. And let's be fair, that's well, it's not just the case with abortion. It can, like I say, with lots of areas of sin in our lives, it can be such a big thing to accept what we've done. That sometimes it can feel easier just to step back and like just deny it all again. But that's a really unhealthy way to live if you're not being in touch with reality, isn't it?
When I was at university, I lived with a beautiful woman, and she went off and had an abortion, and I very much was behind her abortion because I'd had abortions. So it's like, you know, this is the thing to do. And she was so wounded and hurt, and she never went into denial. She went straight into the anger and the depression and the pain. And I found it really annoying. And I thought, oh, can you just not move on? Can you just not get over whatever it is, you know, you're going through? But looking back, I realise now, she wasn't prepared to be stuck in denial. You know? That's
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how do you think, like, you know, the society or the media kind of play into this? Because I know they often will try and like normalise it, and it seems like society in general can often be in denial about this. How do you see that played out?
Well, I was only looking the other day just to make sure I'm still, you know, right and thinking about this, about the NHS, and unfortunately they haven't changed their language. So society, when you look at the NHS, for, you know, if you're pregnant, your baby at so many weeks, your baby. So then you go over to NHS abortion, and suddenly the language becomes the end of a pregnancy, termination, so the language changes. And I find that really frightening.
Yeah, I think, like you say, that the euphemisms that people will use in an effort to confirm themselves in this state of denial, it's like jumping through hoops. It's crazy. And I know with the government, they're clearly in a state of denial about this, because they'll be giving out, baby loss certificates for miscarriage of any stage, giving you time off work if you've had a miscarriage. And I'm not saying any of these things aren't good, but how crazy is that when they'll also suddenly say it's not a baby, it's just a pregnancy if you're having an abortion. They don't even want to say the word fetus anymore. Even that they feel might have some slight human connotations to it. So it's just ending a pregnancy, and that's all we'll say about it. If it's not wanted, that is. Yeah,
and those 2 weeks off, I think it's been named as bereavement. Well, for there to be bereavement, there must have been a death. So I was speaking to a woman only the other day on the phone, and she was talking about, and unfortunately she's not the only woman that's told me this, that when she was at school years ago, they did sex education, and part of that, a woman came in and talked about, if you were to have a crisis pregnancy, that, you can have an abortion. And immediately that sort of changed her heart and her mindset, because she thought, so I do have a choice. There is another option out there, but it was the only choice that was offered. And she played that out many years later when she got pregnant and remembered, I do have a choice. And that actually this was a very subtle form of like mind play at school.
I've heard that from so many people who actually, looking back, feel quite angry at the lack of choices that were presented to them. And that's why they actually take objection to people saying they're pro-choice. It's like, well, where were all my choices? And it's not that there weren't any other options, but that there weren't options really presented to them. And it was shown to be like the responsible thing is to have an abortion, or the normal thing is to have an abortion. So that it became much more difficult to consider keeping the baby, which might have been a difficult thing anyway. So you can see why some of those people might be quite angry at it. Looking at some of the experiences then that either you've had or people that you've been helping and journeying with have had, are there any people, I'm just thinking, like we've just been sharing a little bit about the spiritual side of it. Are there people who you've seen that have maybe had a spiritual experience, and that has, maybe, started going back to church or started to pray or whatever it might be, and that has helped them to recognise the truth about the abortion? Or even the other way around, maybe people who have come to accept the truth about their abortion and have become sort of awoken spiritually and started to have a journey with God after that. Is that something that you see played out really at all?
Yeah, especially the first example you gave. I remember years ago a woman rang and she was in so much denial. And after the phone call, I rang you and I said, Isabel, how do you think people ever sort of wade out of denial? And immediately, and it was Holy Spirit led, you said, I think first of all needs to be a conversion. And the next few phone calls I got, which I think was no coincidence, was I've just had a conversion, I'm now a Christian, and I think it's that conversion to Jesus where Jesus will shine the light into an area that people now can look at. So that happens loads of times. And then the flip side, like you said, we do get people that come to Rachel's Vineyard who are atheist, agnostic, or have no real belief at all in Jesus, but they're in so much pain, they're willing to give anything a go. And I think that's very much, I smile when I think about them, because that was part of my story. You see, you either get on your knees or God puts you on your knees, and that's where God met me. And I was able then to go to Rachel's Vineyard. So for the women and the men that come with no faith but are willing to give it a go, Jesus is so generous with them, and that I just get to see the most miraculous conversions.
And I think that's beautiful because, I know the kind of structure of Rachel's Vineyard, and nothing is foisted on anybody. It's not like somebody's sort of saying, you must have this. But you can see that there may be that openness that they've got. Jesus is so ready to fill it,
definitely.
And that is obviously going to be a massive help to any woman or man that's struggling. Moving on from that then, Rachel, if people are maybe aware of those around them who are in a state of denial, maybe somebody close to them, a family member, or somebody at work, whatever it might be, is there anything that they can say or do, or is it just a case of waiting? You know, any advice that you can give them? Because I know it can be quite a frustrating time for family if they can see, I know, you know, that I just want you to accept this. What advice can you give to those people?
Well, I think that the mallet hitting somebody over the head with, you know, do you know you're in denial will never work. You know, but I think the more gentle, loving approach is actually to pray for their conversion, and also for your own conversion of heart as well, that can sometimes be hardened through frustration, impatience. And there's always then a door that will open up and allow you, like in a conversation, they'll say something like, you know, well, I had no choice, I had to get rid of it. Well, what's it? You know, and having those conversations. And for me, when I converted and when I suddenly realised what I'd done through abortion, it was a beautiful woman called Kathleen, God rest her soul. And I knew the most religious woman at school, always talking about Jesus. I knew when I hit rock bottom, it was Kathleen that I ran to, because I knew I'd be met with love and truth together. And she never said, oh, it was all right what you did. But equally, she met me in a really loving way.
Yeah, I always think a lot of the things that you say to people are more sort of an invitation rather than a confrontation. Yeah. And I think that it's understanding that big difference. You can't kind of confront somebody when they're in that state of denial, but you can always keep gently inviting them in a very gentle way to maybe have another look at the truth, and just sort of almost trying again to see if there's a little chink anywhere, but not in a way that's going to, you know, cause a confrontation. Yeah. And I think one of the lovely ways of doing that is using testimonies. Whether it's something from yourself, if you're somebody who can share a personal testimony, or using other people's testimonies, you know, just letting somebody know that, you know, you've got something from this video that you watched, or a book that you read, or, you know, even if it's something short on social media, and maybe just sharing that either directly or indirectly with people, you know, maybe reposting something on social media, a personal testimony from somebody who's been through an abortion and found healing, that can maybe just begin to help somebody else recognise the truth. And it doesn't even have to be anything as direct as that. It can just be anything that maybe looks at the humanity of the child, can't it? That can maybe just help people to begin to look at that issue again.
I think that's the perfect way in, is, you know, if you, like you say, your own testimony, or going onto the website of March for Life, there's brilliant testimonies there, and there's such a huge selection, you know, which I use, you know, even when people ring Rachel's Vineyard and am I the only man that ever contacted you, and I send the links of the men, or, you know, I was coerced, I'll send the links for those. Yeah. You know,
so what are the things that you would generally say then, Rachel, if you're meeting people at Rachel's Vineyard, or you know, even just journeying with them long before they ever get to Rachel's Vineyard? How do you help people who are in that state of denial?
I think on the Rachel's Vineyard, having that group setting, that when sometimes we haven't got the language ourselves to say something, hearing somebody else say it, I think that's really helpful.
That's interesting.
You know, and I think just journeying with people where they're at, I've always said, haven't I, is, you know, that I needed to know I was loved before I was willing to go there. And for somebody to work through the stages of grief, they've got to feel safe. Yeah. And if they don't feel safe or loved, they're never going there. And I think that's what Rachel's Vineyard really does hold together on that weekend, is everybody's safe to say whatever it is they want to say. You know, and some will come out with something like, you know, well, I'm still really happy about my abortion. And it isn't met with anything but love. You know, and as the weekend goes on, all that breaks down. So I think it's meeting people where they're at.
So what about if somebody's listening or watching to this and they're beginning to think, you know what, I think that's me. I think I might have been in denial about my abortion or abortions. Like you said, maybe they've had one that they've recognised, and now they're beginning to think, you know what, if I'm honest, that other one was an abortion and it did matter just as much. Or maybe I helped someone else had an abortion, or encouraged somebody in some way, and they're beginning to recognise that they can't deny that they played a part in someone else's abortion. Maybe just to end with it, is there anything you could say to that person who's beginning to maybe do that kind of quite challenging and courageous thing of owning up to their own abortion.
Yeah, I'm straight away I'm just thinking about Sister Miriam James, an amazing nun who does great videos on healing, and she always says you wouldn't go into a bad neighbourhood on your own ever. It's too dangerous. That includes your head. So don't go into your head on your own. You're not going to be able to weave your way out of it. And I think, you know, if you're in any stage of denial, allow other people where you feel safe and loved, like Rachel's Vineyard, to help you navigate yourself out of that dangerous neighbourhood and into the peace and love that you deserve through accepting what has happened, recognising it, and honouring yourself and your children.
That is beautiful, Rachel, and I think that's something that's going to stay with me as well. That's a really interesting thing that you just put in my head. I just want to say something to you as we end, the people who are either listening or viewing this. Remember that the algorithms on social media, on YouTube, don't always allow videos like this to be shared as much as other videos might. So I really want to encourage you to share this, whether it's personally with people or on social media, so that everyone can hear a bit more about abortion denial and how to overcome that and how to navigate through it. And thank you so much for being with us today. Make sure that you subscribe, like our channels and share them. Thank you. And thank you, Rachel.